coffee this morning? Before. All right, we're going to get a little more flavor this morning. We have, as our first speaker, Mark Pentleton coming to us from Scotland.
From Scotland, yeah.
From Scotland. We are, a handful of the people that Mark has reached. He's actually reached millions of people. He is founder of, is it Radiolingua?
Radiolingua, yeah.
Radiolingua. And he is all over the language podcast world, and if you know anything, podcasts are super hot right now. So he has been running Radiolingua since 2011, I believe?
2006.
2006, okay. I pulled up the wrong Wikipedia. Anyway, I'm going to let him take over this show. Everybody give a warm welcome to Mark Pentleton.
Thank you very much indeed. Never believe anything you read in Wikipedia, basically. Good morning to you all. I'm really, really pleased to be here. Is this very echoey? Does it seem quite overloaded? I don't know whether somebody can fix that, but I'll keep talking anyway. Today we're going to be talking about coffee, which is probably a good thing, first thing in the morning. We're going to be talking about language learning, and basically I'm going to tell you a little bit about the coffee break story, where we came from, why we do what we do, and how we do what we do. We're talking a little bit also about the coffee break theory and why we put things together, why we put language courses together in the way that we do, and how we reach an audience of many millions of language learners around the world. And by some miracle, some perfect alignment of programming, this session actually leads straight into the coffee break. So everything is good. If you've had their coffee already, hopefully you can last through a little presentation about coffee until you get to the coffee break. Obviously, we're talking about coffee, but we're really talking about language learning because that's what it's all about. Back in 2006, October 2006, I had an idea. We wanted to start doing something about language learning. I was previously working in schools and teaching languages to learners all across Scotland. But on October the 18th, 2006, we launched Coffee Break Spanish. And you can actually see, this is my, I don't know whether this is going to work, but let's see. Yep, there we go. You can see my diary. No, can you see that? Yeah. Is it working? Yeah. My diary from the week of October the 18th, 2006, launch of Coffee Break Spanish, and then, I don't know if you can see this, the day after it says, write email to family to encourage them to download it, so that at least we get some downloads. And it continued from there. We basically, after a few weeks, after really 10 days, we already were hitting the charts. In fact, we were topping the charts in iTunes after 10 days with Coffee Break Spanish, because we were the first Spanish podcast we were the first beginners Spanish podcast in iTunes back in 2006. And this is a time when people didn't really know about podcasts. I think everyone knows about podcasts now. Most people certainly will know about podcasts now. And I saw this as a fantastic opportunity to share my love of language learning and indeed my experience teaching Spanish with learners from all around the world. Now, this has gone on. We've continued to publish content over the past 10 years. And indeed, this was just the other day when I had a look at the charts. And that's the top 10 episodes, the top 10 language learning episodes in the UK. And I think I'm right in saying that there's only one of them that isn't actually ours. So quite proud of that. We have been topping the charts in iTunes all through that period and continue to do so. But I'm going to take you back a little, take you back indeed to, back to 1986 actually. And I'll show you this lovely photo. My wife told me really not to show this photo. My sons said that they would disown. I'll stand here. My sons said that they would disown me if I showed this photo. I've got a 15-year-old son and a 12-year-old son, but this was when I was 14, surrounded by my collection of language learning books. And just above, what you can't actually see, it says the Pentleton School of Languages. As a 14-year-old, my desire to learn languages and to be surrounded by language learning books. And I'm sure some of you recognise some of those older versions of certain titles, like the blue Teach Yourself covers. Those were the good old days, eh? Anyway, this has gone on. Whenever I'm doing this kind of presentation, I speak a lot to children in schools in the UK, and when I'm doing this presentation, I always feel a little bit awkward showing these kind of photos, but I know that here I'm surrounded by like-minded people, and I'm sure that you've all got shelves like that. Those are just two of my shelves of language learning books, and indeed that's not counting the various boxes in the garage, or garage as some of you will say, or whatever. I say garage, we'll stick with garage. So, in those days, I was fantastically interested in languages, and I've always been interested in languages. I went on to do a languages degree at Glasgow University, and I studied French and Spanish and Italian, and then went into teaching. And I absolutely adored teaching languages because it was this opportunity to share what I loved with learners who were as enthusiastic as me. And this is the sort of classroom situation, although probably in Scotland we're more used to having school uniform than this kind of uniform in the classroom. But I also was teaching a lot with adult learners and working with adult learners in evening classes and so on. And over time, I spent time in school and I spent time out of school also working with local authorities, helping local authorities promote languages and helping young people understand that languages, and again, I know I'm preaching completely to the converted here, languages are not a school subject. They're not something that you do for 3 hours a week. Languages are something that are alive, and for young people, certainly in the schools I was working in Scotland, it was quite difficult for them to realise that languages were so much more than that thing that they do first thing on a Monday and last thing on a Friday in school. So we wanted to take languages out of the classroom. I worked with a local authority project where we were dealing with a whole community of schools across the west of Scotland, looking at ways to improve language learning, looking at ways to take languages out of the classroom and give learners the opportunity to use the language in different contexts. So what we ended up doing was starting work on filmmaking in language learning, music production, art, design, and also podcasting. And immediately, back in 2005, so in the very, very early days of podcasting, I saw the potential for podcasting in language learning. It's an audio format, traditionally. It's the perfect opportunity for engaging people in a way that they don't necessarily feel like they are learning. And so with Coffee Break Spanish, which we launched around the time, this is what we tried to do. We tried to achieve something that was just that. We wanted to encourage people to think about the ways in which they learned the language and do that while they were perhaps doing something else. I spoke to a lot of people around that time, particularly the learners, adult learners who were attending. I'm trying to avoid this microphone overloading. I think I can stand here. We spoke to adult learners who were looking. No.
I'll see if I can get some.
Thank you. I'm a walker. I need to walk.
It does sound good in the back, but
It's just a little bit boomy in the front. Okay. Actually, if I stand here. Anyway. We spoke to lots of language learners, lots of adult learners, and asked them what are the things that you find difficult? What are the problems? What are the issues about language learning for you? And the main thing that everyone came back with was time. I don't have time to learn a language. And talking to people who perhaps were interested in travel, were interested in culture of other countries, perhaps they needed to learn a language for work, but it always came down to a question of time. So what I wanted to do was try and take that idea, I don't have time to learn a language, and turn it around. So I wanted to look at the question, or the statement, I don't have time to learn a language, and change it to how can I learn a language in the time I do have? And when we think about it, what is that time? That time is when we're having a coffee, when we're relaxing, perhaps when we're at the gym, when we're stuck in a traffic jam like so often, or just when we're doing something else. And what I really wanted to see is if we could take the idea of learning a language and create content that would fit into those times that people have available. And that's where we focused on the idea of coffee break, and focusing on the idea of being able to use a coffee break for language learning. And now that may be for people who like coffee, but if you don't like coffee, it's still okay. You can still use coffee break, French or Spanish or anything else. How are we doing? I'll keep talking and see if that's certainly said. Can everybody still hear me? Yeah. I'll put on my teacher voice and project. Sounds better. That's much better. Thank you. Let me just check that this is on. Okay. So we wanted to look at the coffee break style language learning, and we came up with the idea of coffee break Spanish. Still focusing on learning content, still focusing on structured pedagogy, but creating content in a way that was able to be consumed in short periods of time that people had. So we were trying to refute the idea that I've not got time for language learning. Well, let's make content that will fit the time that you do have. So we came up with Coffee Break Spanish back in 2006, and then formed the company Radiolingua to encompass Coffee Break Spanish in any future content that we created. And over the past 11 years, we've built this and now have had over 200 million downloads of our language learners not downloads of language learners, that would be quite a long time, downloads of language lessons over the past 10 years. And that now equates to over 1.3 million lessons per month delivered. And basically, somewhere in the world, every 2.4 seconds, someone starts learning a language or starts a language lesson with Coffee Break. So what I'd like to do now is show you a very short video that kind of summarizes what we do with Coffee Break, that will give you a feel for how you or other people may learn a language with Coffee Break. I hope the sound works.
Meet Helen. Helen works in a busy office and loves her job. Her day is filled with meetings and phone calls and report writing. When Helen gets home from work, she spends time with her family and catches up on housework. Helen also likes to keep fit, so she goes out for a run 2 or 3 times a week. Helen has always wanted to learn French. She picked up some French at school, but she found it difficult and was always afraid to speak out and put on an accent. Helen has been to France a few times on holiday and knows that she would get much more out of her trip if she were able to speak French. With her busy life, Helen doesn't feel she has the time to attend a French class or arrange private lessons. What Helen needs is a way to learn French which can fit around her life. That's where Coffee Break French comes in. With Coffee Break French, Helen can build on what she already knows, learn where and when it suits her best. She can download audio lessons to her phone and learn while she's out running. She can watch the video lessons on her tablet while she's on her way to work. And in her coffee break, she can review what she's learned. Helen can even join a worldwide community of learners and build her confidence through the Coffee Break French social media channels. You can join Helen and millions of learners around the world and start learning French in your coffee break today, or maybe at the gym, in bed, walking your dog, or wherever and whenever it suits you. Visit coffeebreakfrench.com for more information.
So that gives you a kind of summary of what we're trying to do. I'm very aware that many of you are what I would almost term as professional language learners. You've got huge experience of learning different languages in many ways. And perhaps, I'll talk a little more about this later, perhaps the kind of learner that we're addressing much of our content to, particularly our early content, the beginning courses, are other types of learners who have less experience perhaps of learning languages. But as I say, I'll speak a little more about that later. Really coming back to this idea of the time that we have available, this idea, if you like, of downtime. And there also is something of another time that we have available that is even more difficult to use sensibly, and that is dead time. And this, I think, is perhaps where we're going to get a little bit of a cheese warning, because I'm about to reveal our very, very cheesy mission statement, if you like. What we like to do is try to take your downtime and your dead time and turn it into your do time. A bit more of a moan, come on, oh. I know, very cheesy, particularly for this time of the morning. 9:30 is a little too early for cheese, I think. So taking that downtime, taking that dead time that you're doing other things, and helping you to turn that into your do time. And that's got nothing to do with doing time in prison or anything like that. It's about doing something useful in the time that you have available. So let's think about the coffee break theory, as we call it. We're looking at 20 minutes. We're looking at something that is a very short space of time. And what can you do in 20 minutes? Well, we've almost been sitting here for 20 minutes, and I hope that you've learned something about what we do. But 20 minutes is a space of time and a length of time that you can actually do something very, very useful in. In fact, what I would say is with the right tools and the right content, you can make solid progress with a language in just 20 minutes a day. And just to say, if you add hashtag coffee break and hashtag MTLLangfest17, that's 140 characters, okay? Just saying if you happen to want to tweet that out. And if you do, it's actually been tweeted just a few minutes ago on my Twitter accounts and indeed our language Twitter accounts. We have Learn French, Learn Spanish, Learn Italian, Learn German, and Learn Mandarin. So if you feel like tweeting that, it's 140 characters, just perfect for a nice wee retweet. Okay, oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. Let's move on. So, what we try to explain to learners is that coffee break Spanish or French or whatever language you happen to be learning is a bit like going for a coffee with your friend who happens to speak the language and who knows how to help you to learn. So the coffee break scenario, we use coffee break as a branding tool, but the coffee break scenario is about that. It's a friendly experience. It's something that you're sitting down with someone and learning something useful. Now, thinking through this, we could be talking about learning how to order a drink. We could be learning how to check into a hotel, very much transactional ideas, functional language that would be used and learned at an early stage in learning the language. But a coffee break lesson needn't be something that is very, very simple or very early on in the process, because we can take that same idea, a 20-minute lesson, and do something much, much more complicated. And I'll explain a little about our seasons, but we have seasons that take you up to a much more advanced level. And so some of these 20-minute lessons are things like, I don't know if you can see these, but taking French as an example, in advanced French, we're looking at things like preceding direct objects, using the imperfect verb versus the preterite in Spanish, for example, c'est versus il est, subjunctives and how to use the subjunctives in certain situations with pour que or craindre, using expressions, using idiomatic expressions like en faire lourd, indirect pronouns, using sans douter. So it's not necessarily booking into a hotel, it can be something much more complex. And that's what we try to do in still this space of 20 minutes in your coffee break, or your tea break, or your gym break, or your driving the car break, or whatever. So we started, as I said, with Coffee Break Spanish back in 2006. And moving from there, we've added other languages. We added French in 2008, then German in 2012, Italian in 2015, and just this year we've added Mandarin also to the range. And very often you see language companies pop up and they suddenly are offering 30-odd languages or something like that. And I'm very conscious that this has been a very slow development, and we've been very, very careful in a sense about how we've developed these courses. But that's because I personally have had a role in every single one of these courses, and I think it's very important to maintain that level of accuracy, to maintain that level of investment in all of the courses. So that's why we've gone quite slowly. We've developed a huge number of lessons associated with each of these courses, but we haven't suddenly got 30 languages, and we intend to continue this careful process of expansion in the coming years. But back in 2012, sorry, it was kind of 2013, we were looking at what we were doing for adults and wanted to see if there was a way in which we could compare the situation with adult learning and develop something for younger learners. And working with a group of younger learners, I think I just pressed the wrong button there, sorry about that. We wanted to develop something that would be very similar to our coffee break style things, so we came up with High Five. And High Five French was launched in 2014, and then High Five Spanish was launched last year. Now these are courses for younger learners, sort of aged 7 or 8 onwards, and they are already in use in many, many schools across the UK, and indeed elsewhere. We have got some schools in Canada. We're hoping to get a few more schools in Canada, and indeed in the US for High Five French and Spanish. But the key element in all of this, and again this is something that will come up later, is that we always work with a learner and a teacher at no matter what level. We've always got a learner who is learning, and therefore you can listen to the learner perhaps making mistakes and being corrected, listen to the learner maybe struggling with certain aspects and asking questions. The learner is always a fairly sensible learner in a sense, because they need to be asking the right kind of questions. and the kind of questions that you as a learner or other people as a learner would have. And we've done exactly the same with High Five. It's a learner, a native English speaker, learning the French or Spanish language with a native French or Spanish speaker. And the difference with Coffee Break and High Five is that High Five is a video course. We felt that younger learners really needed that visual element. So you'll see a little clip of High Five a bit later on. In addition to our Coffee Break content, we also wanted to dip our toes in other areas of language, in other languages indeed. And this is when we came up with the concept of 1-minute languages. Again, coming back to this idea of, I've not got time to learn a language. Well, if you tell me you've not got time to learn a language and you can do it in 1 minute, then you're an awfully busy person. These are our 1-minute courses. They are literally 10 lessons of 2 or 3 minutes each. 2 or 3 minute French just didn't sound quite as good as 1 minute French, hence the title, 1 minute French. But we actually now have 1-minute languages available in 25 languages from Arabic to Zulu. For a long time it was Catalan to Zulu, and that just didn't seem right. We needed the A to Z. So for all your language learning needs from A to Z, come to 1minutelanguages.com. And 1-minute languages, I think I sometimes kind of flow past 1-minute languages when I'm talking to people because we focus so much of our development on Coffee Break. But actually, 1-minute languages they serve a purpose. They serve the purpose that many people need, the purpose that will allow you to make a good impression on a native speaker. I'm probably speaking to the wrong audience here, but normally when I speak to an audience and I say, well, if I happen to come up and say in Norwegian, hi, my name's Mark, I don't speak much Norwegian, I'm learning Norwegian, I'd love to learn some more, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I love you, a beer please. If I can get away with that to the Norwegian speaker, for whom English is so not a problem, that's all the more impressive. Now again, I know that probably everyone in the room will be able to do that in 40 languages, but not to worry. With 1-minute languages, we're trying to address that need from lots of learners that they just need to make that first connection, that first impression, that first, the thing that will open the door. Perhaps they'll then go on and do the business deal in English, not Mandarin or Japanese or whatever, but nonetheless, they've made that first impression. And I was actually talking to someone last week about this, and he was telling me that the free 1-minute language lessons that he had downloaded had literally made him millions of pounds through the business deals. He works in the oil industry, and through the business deals to do with pipelines, he was going into to companies and starting off with those exact phrases that I explained earlier and getting through on the phone because he used the language that he had learned in 1-minute languages. So here's a little favor for you, or a little deal if you like. We've got this 1-minute Polyglot pack. And this is access to all of the video versions of all of those courses. So there are 25 language courses. And what I've done is set up a site here. If you go to that, thepolyglotpack.com, then you will be able to download all of those courses for absolutely free. And it gives you access to all of the 25 language courses. So if you've fancied dabbling in one of the languages up there that you haven't already dabbled in, then that's maybe a way to get it. One thing I would ask, that is for the people in the room, it's for the people at the conference. So I would ask that you don't tweet that out and we suddenly get thousands of people using that free code because the value of that product is about £145. So please don't tweet that or don't share that, but please use it and let us know what you think. Again, these are very basic introductions. They're just a touch of the language. From our point of view, they're also dipping our toes in the waters of another language and seeing if that is something that we could take further. And just before we leave 1-minute languages, just to mention that we are actually recruiting. So if you speak a language as a native speaker other than the ones up there, please come and talk to me because we would like to record a new series of 1-minute Slovak or 1-minute, I'm trying to think of something else, Pashto or whatever. So if you do speak another language, then let me know. We can do that in many ways. We can do it sometimes at a distance, but equally just saying, I'll be in Iceland, and if you happen to speak one of those languages that's not up there, it would be very possible to do a recording in Iceland. Okay, let's move on. We'll come back to Coffee Break. Coffee Break, as I said, has a series of courses. It's a series of seasons. We use Coffee Break in seasons. And we actually have 4 seasons of French and Spanish, 2 of Italian and German so far, and as I said, we've just launched Coffee Break Chinese. I'm often asked about Coffee Break, and I think there's an assumption that Coffee Break is quite light touch and it's not really serious and so on. But as I say, the higher levels, the sort of later seasons, season 3 and 4, are dealing with much more complex stuff. I don't really like putting a European framework of reference label on things. I know that some people do like that, but I think when we say, oh, this course is A1 and this course is B2 and so on, I don't think you can say this course is that particular level, because I think that particular level represents so much more than just the materials. And so we don't say that this is C1 or this is B2 or anything like that. But if you want to get a feel for the kind of content that we would be working at those different levels, our first season is A1-ish. We move into A2 content by season 2, and then by our masterclass, which is another online course that we do, we're looking at B1 into B2. With season 3, we're moving into B2 content, and by the time we get to season 4, we could be looking at some content that could be seen as C1 content. Again, if you're a B2 speaker or a C1 speaker of a language, then there's so much more to that than an audio and video and text-based course. There's all the production skills that would go along with being a particular level. But in terms of the kind of level that we're talking about, that's where we pitch things. And it's not just about the courses themselves. There's lots more content. There's lots more additional materials. We've got our online course. We've got other video courses. We do special courses on particular areas of the language, like the verb fix, which combines learning verbs with music, and perhaps for some is an acquired taste, for others they absolutely love it. We also have another course that I worked on previously called the Verbcast, which combines learning French verbs with relaxation techniques. And we did an experiment with lots of learners in a group of Scottish schools for this. And over the course of 4 weeks, we taught them through the podcasts, the Verbcast. And each day they were listening to a different set of verbs. They were going into a trance-like state. Not really, but they were relaxed and they were learning verbs. And what we didn't do was tell their teachers anything about this, because we were working through the head teachers of the school, and the head teachers were happy for us to work directly with the pupils, but in a sense as a secret from their own teachers. So by the end of the course, we asked the teachers, can you do a report on progress with these children? And it turned out that the children who had been involved in this had suddenly massively improved their writing skills because of the verbs that they had been working on. And the teachers had no idea about this. The teachers had no idea what we'd been doing with the pupils. We were a little scared that the local newspapers would pick up story, "Teachers hypnotize children to learn their French." Fortunately, that didn't happen. But it does. It comes up time and time again, and we get comments that well, I've had many emails saying, I go to sleep with you every night. And I'm like, okay. My wife is not too comfortable about those ones. But anyway, so different ways of using audio content in language learning, and we try to kind of expand that out not just from the main Coffee Break courses. And like any language learning product, we do also focus very strongly on social. And with our Facebook groups, we've got huge numbers of followers on Facebook. We've got about 34,000 in the Coffee Break French Facebook page, about 25 in Spanish and so on. And we've got really, really active members of those Facebook groups. We post content every few days, and people contribute, try out their French, get support through that. And we also do a lot of Facebook Live, and this is something that we've been developing quite a bit. This is a session I did with my co-host from season 4, Pierre Benoit, who is the most Scottish-sounding French person you will ever meet. He's spent about 20 years in Scotland, and his French is still impeccable, obviously, but he does speak English with a French-Scottish accent, so that's something to think about. But again, the numbers there's about 12,000 or so people tuned in to that particular session. And the thing that amuses my wife no end is the fact that the key demographic that we seem to appeal to is 55 to 64-year-old women in England. I don't know what's going on there. But again, if they come back and buy our courses, I'm not complaining. So this is what we try to do. It's more than just our courses. We try to expand it out. We've also got Instagram. Instagram's in a bit of a pause at the moment, but we try to use the different areas that we can to improve and to share the opportunities for language learning. And we, when I say we, it's a small team. Myself and my wife, we're the co-directors of the company. We've got 4 people, 2 of whom work full-time in the company on content marketing and in content production. And then we've got other people for support and admin, and they just work part-time. And then we've got a range of people that we work with to produce the content, to record the content with us, and they all work on an ad hoc basis when we're working on a particular course. So who listens to Coffee Break? I mentioned some of the ideas of who listens. These are the people who listen to Coffee Break. You can see there almost half our listeners come from the US, then a huge chunk in the UK too. And then coming down from there, obviously, we've got Australian listeners, Canadian listeners, and some Northern European listeners too. And the thing that really fascinates me is this one. It's the age range of our listeners. And you'll notice that in particular, pretty much over half our listeners are in the older age range. So you can see there, I don't know exactly the numbers, but we've got about 15% of people listening are 55 and over. And that is something that comes back time and time again when we're doing work with our learners. Older listeners seem to really enjoy our content. And we often wonder why, we ask why, and we get some feedback, and I'll share that with you in a moment. But we're also very interested in how people are listening, and the vast majority of people are listening on mobile. They consume the content on mobile, and then they're able to use the mobile elements of that content to interact with us, to go straight from the listening to the podcast into Facebook and posting their attempts at using the language in Facebook. But if we think about who these people are, these are not meant in any way to be pejorative about the people that we're working with, but this is what some of our listeners have told us. These are people who perhaps are low in confidence in using the language. They're not sure about how to speak the language. They're not sure about how to make that big step in actually using the language. They maybe have had previous bad experiences with language learning. Perhaps in school, they remember the way that they learned languages in school and aren't necessarily confident about the languages as a result. They very often have few opportunities to practice. So perhaps they're on the tube listening to our podcasts and don't really have the opportunity to practice what they're learning. Or perhaps they have specific needs, like they're moving to France, they're looking to set up home in Spain, they're looking at different areas, or perhaps have got a relative coming into their family. They've got a new grandson or granddaughter who is French speaking, and therefore they want to learn the language that way. Virtually all claim that they have an interest in culture or travel. They feel that is an important part of the reason for learning languages. And again, from the figures that we saw, we do have a slightly older audience. But I think that the phrase that kind of sums this up is the fact that we tend to create language courses for people who don't necessarily think of themselves as language learners. And I think that really is a lot of people. People who think, no, I couldn't learn a language, or I've never tried learning a language, or I tried learning a language and it didn't go well. And these seem to be the types of people that we really engage with, and we really work well with, and we're delighted about inspiring a group of people who aren't necessarily thinking of themselves as language learners to learn a language. It's not only that group. Obviously, there are many other groups. Many students use our content if they're doing language courses to enhance what they do. I believe that some of you in the room, from things that you've told me over the past 24 hours, use our content, and I'm delighted about that. So let's think a little about how and why we do what we do, and the key features of the sort of teaching and learning process that we use with our learners. There are 4 kind of core elements of this. The teacher and the learner, and I'll give you some examples of each of them. Informal content, but solid content. My 15-year-old son tells me now that solid is not a good thing, so I need to rethink my vocabulary, because apparently... How was your physics... Sorry?
Your 15-year-old son said solid means...
Is not a good thing. He said that solid is not a good thing. I asked him how his physics exam went. Oh, it was really solid. And I thought, oh, that's good. It's a solid exam. He felt confident. No, apparently solid does not mean that for a 15-year-old Scottish boy. Solid means really tough. I mean solid in a good way. It's informal, but solid. We very much follow a steady path. There's progression. There's programmed language, if you like, through the courses. And the key element in everything that we do is giving thinking time. And the wonderful thing about podcasts is that you can give that thinking time. We're not thinking about creating courses on CDs, which is a sort of past, it's a past area of language production where you're thinking about, well, I've got this course, but I've got to make it fit within 54 minutes, otherwise it won't fit on the CD. We can leave 10 seconds in a podcast for people to think about what they've been asked. It doesn't matter. It doesn't cost them anymore. It's not really it's going to take a few milliseconds longer to download if it's a longer episode, but it's not really an issue. Anyway, let me talk a little bit about each of these, and I'll give you some examples too. We'll focus first of all on the teacher and the learner. 10 minutes, okay. Every single course that we do involves a teacher and a learner. And that's at the very early stages when the learner is just starting. They've got no experience in the language before, and therefore they really are authentically brand new to the language. That's my job in Coffee Break Chinese, because I don't speak any Chinese, and I'm learning Mandarin as we go through the lessons. In other courses, I'm the teacher, so I've been teaching the French course and the Spanish course and the Italian course, along with native speakers and the learner, crucially. In the later courses, this becomes a sort of expert learner who has got lots of experience of the language, but perhaps needs things tightened up. So I'm going to let you hear a little section here. This is from our Coffee Break French Season 4, with me as the expert learner and Pierre Benoit as the native speaker. The context for Season 4 is basically a kind of soap opera almost, where we've got four people and their lives in Paris as they intertwine and everything like that. So you can have a quick look at this. We're focusing on one particular phrase here, mais ce qui s'est passé de côté. And I'll let you listen to the little section here, and you'll hear me asking questions about the certain phrases, and in a sense using what I know about these phrases to lead the native speaker into telling us something.
En français, c'est différent, on utilise the side.
Yeah, to say, on met quelque chose de côté.
Exactement.
Une question, est-ce qu'on peut dire aussi mettre de l'argent de côté?
Ah oui, c'est différent. C'est si on veut économiser, par exemple.
Par exemple, donc, si je mets de l'argent de côté, ça veut dire que je pourrais me payer une nouvelle télévision, par exemple.
Exactement, ou un nouvel ordinateur.
Tout à fait. Donc, mettre quelque chose de côté, is to save up something for the future. And in this case, mettre quelque chose, mettre ce qui s'est passé de côté, it means to put something to the side, put it behind you. It's interesting when words have different ideas like that. When in English we're putting it behind us, in French we're putting it to the side.
So there we've got the kind of expert learner with the teacher, and we're still discussing it, and it feels like a conversation. It's not, we're now going to learn this phrase, mettre quelque chose de côté. Here is an example of this phrase in a say. It's not that. It's a conversation. It's a coffee break. Another aspect that we've talked about is this informal but solid. So we're looking here at using the language that we are learning in an informal way. But again, it's solid. It's serious learning. So in this case, we were looking at this is a Spanish example, again from Season 4. So it's developed language. It's another story, some buried treasure that was found in under the sea in Mallorca in a summer spent in Mallorca, the island in the Balearics off the coast of Spain. So we were focusing here on the phrase así que no me puedo quejar. So quejarse, a verb meaning to complain. And having read this, having talked about that, we then look at other examples of this. And some examples given, for example, no quiero quejarme, pero la sopa está fría. So using quejarse, but changing this time the reflexive pronoun. Another example, esta mañana se ha quejado muchas veces. So putting it into a different tense. And then we'll continue talking about this.
Okay, this one is a little more tricky because we're using an imperative. An imperative, and I guess we're probably using the to form given the context. Don't complain, you've already got enough ice cream.
Max, no te quejes, que ya tienes suficiente largo.
No, it wasn't me, it's not good.
Yeah.
So, no te quejes. The verb is quejar. But because we're using an imperative form here, we take the subjunctive forms, and therefore quejar, the a endings become e. No te quejes, don't complain, que ya tienes.
Suficiente largo.
Suficiente largo.
Más que suficiente.
Más que- You're doing more than enough there. So no te quejes.
Again, I'll stop that there. It's a conversation about it. It's a coffee break once more. A steady path. Throughout all our content, we always focus on this steady path that follows a progression. And we publish kind of curriculum documents for each of our courses, which explain exactly what's included in each lesson. And then, in for example, our third season of Spanish, it's impossible to see this, but to give you an explanation here, in every fifth lesson we have an episode of a soap opera. So we kind of keep coming back to the soap opera idea. People like that, it engages them, and they like the story that follows through the soap opera. However, in the first 4 lessons leading up to that 5th lesson, we cover a whole range of language in different contexts, and we talk about different structures and different aspects of grammar, different vocabulary. And then naturally, it comes up in the conversation in the soap opera. And of course, the listeners are listening and think, oh, I know that phrase now because I learned it 2 weeks ago when we were doing that particular phrase. And that comes right the way through each of the courses there. And the thinking time that I mentioned, again, this is crucial to all of our courses, whether it's the audio content or indeed our video content. And you'll see here just a short clip from one of our High Five Spanish episodes where we've got Sophie, who is our native English speaker, a Scottish native English speaker, learning French with, in this case, Miguel, who is from the south of Spain. And all this was filmed in the south of Spain, where I'm heading in 2 weeks' time to do another series. Here we go.
What is your name in Spanish, please? ¿Cómo te llamas? ¿Cómo te llamas? Vamos a ver. ¿Cómo te llamas? ¿Cómo te llamas? ¿Cómo te llamas? You try. ¿Cómo te llamas?
¿Cómo te llamas?
I'll ask you what's your name and you can reply. Okay. ¿Cómo te llamas?
So in that case, it's very much directed. It's a you try looking at the camera and the learners, be they 8-year-old children, repeat the phrase. And in the audio content, it's just that giving the question or the thing for translation or the idea that we're working on and letting the listener have time to think it out while they're driving along rather than having to fumble around and press a pause button or something like that. 10 seconds. There's a lot you can do in 10 seconds. So thinking time, very, very core to everything that we do. I have to say, none of this is rocket science. It's all about the personality that we try to put over with all of our content and the love of what we do, the love of the learning. Briefly, we have done, we have worked with a student from the University of Lund who wanted to do some research on the materials that we were creating. And he actually came up along with us with quite a complex survey on the structures and the feelings and the systems that we use with Coffee Break. So an example question, when encouraged to try to say something in French during the podcast, to what extent do you respond? So this is this 10 seconds where we ask our listeners to say something, to what extent do they respond? So you can see the answers here, from not at all to very much so. Some people say it aloud, and that is an increasing curve. But then the other one is say it into your head, and that's also very much more an increasing curve. More people tend to say it into their heads when they're doing it. But nonetheless, they are actually creating the language that they're being encouraged to create through the listening to the podcast. Another important question for us was, to what extent do you feel Anna, who is the learner in Coffee Break French, to what extent do you feel her language mistakes are similar to the mistakes that you make yourself? So again, something else that we feel was important in the sense that we need to allow learners who are listening to get the answers that they may have. So trying to almost predetermine those answers through the learner. And again, very much so, verging towards the very much so seemed to be a common answer. And I think just one more. To what extent do you feel that you are participating in the interaction between Mark and Anna or Mark and Pierre Benoit? Again, focusing on Coffee Break French here. ultimately, this is our key indicator of coffee breakness, if there's such a word. Does it feel like a coffee break? Does it feel like that you're part of that? You're sitting there with us in the coffee shop and experiencing this. And again, very positive responses there. So the conclusions drawn from this study found that the podcasts, along with the supplementary materials, offer higher levels of enhanced input, interaction with a person's mind, learner adaptation, practicality, functionality and accessibility, and help available in language production. Its weaker points are interactions between the learner and another person, and between the learner and a computer, as well as in opportunities for linguistic production. Now, in many ways, that's not what we do. There are other companies, one sitting out there, that do very, very effective language and teacher interaction, but it's not something that we do on a live basis in the podcasts. Turning over our thoughts to some of our learners and some of the feedback that we get. I'm going to read this out. I realise it's maybe a little bit boring to listen to people read what's on the screen, but I'll read some of these comments out. I enjoy the banter between Mark and Pierre Benoit the most. The dialogues are not always relevant to me, but there are always clear grammar discussions and useful idiomatic expressions. I also like how difficult grammar is repeated in a variety of contexts. I also enjoy listening to native French speakers. Keep up the friendly French banter. Banter seems to be an ongoing theme here. This is the first French course I have really enjoyed. I love the focus on colloquial expressions and idioms, and the conversations are upbeat and entertaining. Don't change anything, please. Plus, the online newsletter adds to the sense of being part of an international community of online learners. Just from a time point of view, I'm just going to skip ahead here to one final, let me see. This is just a short video of some of our learners we filmed at the language show in London, and that's me almost finished after this one.
Hola, soy David y estoy aquí en el Language Show con el team de Polyglot Spanish y encantado de estar aquí con ellos. Me han ayudado mucho con mi español y he aprendido un montón de cosas de ellos. I want to say thank you to Mark especially for helping me learn. I started a few years ago, and now I'm able to speak a little bit more with my family and my Spanish wife.
Buongiorno, mi chiamo Kristen. Hello, I'm just wanting to say to you how much I really love Coffee Break Italian. I've been learning now with the Coffee Break Italian for about 4 or 5 months, and I'm delighted with the lessons that I receive. It's very useful for me when I go to Italy. I work as a tour manager, sono capogruppo, lavoro in Italian. And the lessons have been very useful to me, both socially and for work. I'm delighted with it.
Hi, I'm Peddy, and I'm using Coffee Break Spanish for the past 6 months to boost my Spanish because I had a dream of learning to be a Spanish teacher. And I am now on a PGCE course training to teach Spanish, and also French and German, and I'm using Coffee Break French and German as well, just to make sure that I can boost my knowledge of those languages. So I want to say a huge, huge thank you to the whole Coffee Break team.
Hi there, my name's Malcolm. I've been using Coffee Break French for 3-4 years. The last one I did was season 4, and I'm very pleased with it. I like to listen to it on my own, usually parked in a car park.
And he went on to say while his wife is doing the supermarket shopping, he sits in the car park on his own. So just some words there. And a key thing for me is that the confidence that our content seems to instill in these learners is just so important. And actually, just a few days ago, I got an email from someone, and this is someone who had been following our Season 3 course, which is set in Nice, and there are 3 learners in it. One is an older gentleman retired, one is an Australian business entrepreneur who's living in Nice, and another is Katie, an American student who's also attending a language course in Nice. And just to explain his email, he said, "Dear people, I want to thank you for Coffee Break French. I'm 70 years old and I have used your materials for many years. One is never too old to learn a new language. The Coffee Break French materials allowed me to enroll in and successfully complete second-year university level French in the United States. But more importantly, it allowed me to travel to Nice this summer, where I was able, like my favourite character Alf, to read my Nice Matin in the morning avec mon petit dictionnaire et mon café. And I've attached a photograph. Merci beaucoup pour tout." And that's, for me, what makes it all worthwhile. When you get an email from a listener listening to the content that we produced, for whom our courses have ultimately changed their life and given them an opportunity to use the language. And someone of 70 years old, we've got learners of 90 years old in our system, and also we've got learners of 4 and 5. That is a little bit about Coffee Break. I hope that you've found this interesting, that you found it useful. I'd be very happy if there's time to take any questions. And equally, I'll be around the rest of the weekend if you have any further questions or would like to chat. Thank you very much.
Hey Mark, so as we spoke before, I think you for the Coffee Break French, it helped me personally, and you know that even some Canadian agencies for immigrants here, they recommended your show, which is really good. I like how you mentioned that there are some strengths and some weaker points on your method. I was wondering about that point. Have you personally found another method that builds on those things that Coffee Break French doesn't focus on, for example, or any Coffee Break?
In terms of another method, there are just so many available, and another method that addresses what we don't offer, I don't necessarily think I've come across anything like that. There are other systems that offer what we don't offer, be they systems where you can get access to a learner online, or to do live practice with a native speaker or something like that. Obviously, as the producer of language learning content, we try to put in what we believe is the right content into that. So I don't think there's anything else that immediately springs to mind. There are other systems which would undoubtedly work for other people, indeed other systems which work personally for me, and they may be the more phased repetition type content. They may be more looking at examples of the language and learning that language in following those examples. But in terms of our Coffee Break content and how we see that in comparison to other materials, I don't think there's anything that I can specifically say that there's another course that I think is better than ours in that sense. But that complements. There's plenty of stuff that complements it. Thanks, Carlos. Kirsten.
Hey.
Hey.
Hey, Mark. Thank you very much. Really, really interesting hearing about Coffee Break from you personally. I have a question, especially because you started in 2006 and you said you started as a podcast. What type of, and because of your target audience, what type of technological kind of obstacles do you come in touch with, do you come across with? Because I mean, now we sort of understand what a podcast is. In 2006, it was nerdorama, right? And it's interesting to me to hear about how you can make it as accessible as possible. So what's the experience, and how do they have to get it on their iPhone? Do they have iPhones?
Yeah.
All that.
Yeah, that is a very good question, because in the early days, that was one of our major struggles, trying to convince people, one, that they could easily access it, and two, that it wasn't going to take up all the space on their device or anything like that. First of all, it was a question of bandwidth and internet connection speeds back then, because in those days we had to make sure that the file sizes was quite small so that people were able to download it, and obviously we still need to look at that in certain ways. But video wasn't really a sensible option back in 2005, and it would just take up far too much space on people's devices. Initially, we did have quite a struggle trying to get people to understand the concept of podcast. And I think back in those days, I was probably a bit of a proponent for podcasting and trying to encourage more people to know about podcasting. But this probably was about 5 years before it became sort of mainstream. And even in the UK, the BBC didn't start doing their catch-up, the iPlayer equivalent on podcasts until about 2009. So it wasn't in the public domain. It wasn't really well known. And therefore, we dealt daily with questions about, do I need an iPod to listen to this? How do I get it? So early on, we kind of moved from the idea of podcasts to just calling them language courses. And the courses, or the audio shows, sometimes we referred to them as, they sort of spoke for themselves. We always had the ability for people to listen on the website, and they were able to download from there. And we tried to kind of work around the the difficulties that perhaps podcasting offered in those days. And now, ironically, we are at a stage where we no longer offer our premium content as a podcast. There were some technical difficulties with that. If anybody wants to talk geekiness later, I'm happy to do that. But we don't offer the premium content as a podcast because the podcast feed protection is very complex. So we now offer online courses, and people come and say, but I really enjoyed it using it in my podcast app. Why can't I still do that? So there's definitely a balance, and it's kind of always looking at that, always addressing the technical needs of learners and looking to maximise the opportunities that technology developments offer us.
Just one more question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mark,
Hi.
So you said you started out in 2006 as maybe one of the first Spanish podcasts, language podcasts. I know there are other people who do have podcasts, language podcasts, and Ollie. Where do you see the future of language podcasts? Like, where is it going? What's the path? How are people going to be using it in the future?
Another good question, making me think. I think the ability for the knowledge about podcasting, the general assumption that people kind of know now what a podcast is, means that there are so many more podcasts available. We, as I said, we're lucky we got in early. We were the first beginners podcast. Notes in Spanish had already been around as a more advanced podcast, but in those days it was a question of trying to get people to understand what it was. Now it's less that, and it's about standing out from the massive crowd that's there. I think there will continue to be more podcast developing. I think for me, the key thing about any development has to be about quality, not just quality of audio, which everybody has so high expectations of the audio quality, as well as the quality of the learning, the quality of the pedagogy and the content. So I think I will see every day, I look at what's out there in the new materials that are coming out, and some I think they're fantastic. Others I think, I don't know that that's going to really match the sort of best of the stuff that's out there. But I think the most important thing for me is ultimately that everyone has a different learning style. And there is, in a sense, space for everyone, because someone will like to learn with me as a teacher, someone will like to learn with someone else as a teacher, and there is space for everyone. I know that some people hate what we do. Some people don't understand my Scottish accent, and they think, oh, he's speaking Spanish with a Scottish accent, which I don't. But, there's space for everyone, and I would hope that it would continue to develop as an industry, I think podcasting itself will continue to develop. And I think there is a difference. This is probably getting into this in too much detail, but there is a difference between the podcasts which are seen as very much kind of industry standard podcasts, and that has been developed by companies like Gimlet in the US, where they're making exceedingly high quality content, and also getting all the advertising deals and everything else to build that. And I think there might well be more of a distance between the sort of what people sometimes see as kind of professional podcasts and amateur podcasts. But hopefully, and this is the job of the companies like Apple and Stitcher and so on, hopefully they will be able to still promote the amateur podcasts and the everyone that's doing that sensibly, and that the discovery of podcasts will continue to be what until now has been pretty good, and hopefully that will continue. So yeah, there's a massive question, and I hope that's gone some way to answering that.
That's awesome, Mark.
Thank you very much.
This was amazing, and I know there was 2 or 3 times I thought during your presentation that I'm going to take this home and I'm going to teach my kids, and I'm going to tell my wife, and she's going to think I'm really smart that I found this stuff. Thank you so much, Mark. Let's give him a big hand.
Thank you very much. Thank you.